The church bell in Tombstone rang 6 times. Each clang was a hammer blow against the silent, dusty morning of 1881. In the Silver Dollar Saloon, Jack Morrison stared into his whiskey. He wasn't drinking it. He was just looking for an answer in the amber liquid, but the glass was as empty as his life. His hands, the same hands that had performed miracles of surgery, now trembled just lifting the shot glass. Pete, the barkeeper, swiped a greasy rag across the bar. "You gonna sit there all day, Doc? Folks are getting sick." A laugh scraped its way out of Jack's throat, dry and brittle. "I ain't a doctor, Pete. Not anymore." He took a swig. The whiskey burned, but it couldn't touch the cold inside him. "Doctors save people. I just watch 'em die." It had been 3 months. 94 days since he'd put his wife, Mary, in the ground. 94 days since he'd failed the one person he'd sworn to protect. His black medical bag, once a symbol of hope, now sat in the corner of his empty house, collecting dust and memories. Every sunrise was just a reminder of the sunset he'd last shared with her. Another day to get through. Another day without a reason. The saloon doors swung open, slicing the gloom with a blade of sunlight. Jack didn't look up. This town had run out of surprises long ago. Then he saw them. A pair of small, bare feet, caked in dirt, standing right beside his table. He slowly raised his head. A little girl. Couldn't be more than 8. Her hair was in 2 dusty brown braids, tied with faded blue ribbons. Her dress was a patchwork of patches. But it was her eyes that caught him. They were old. Too old. Filled with a kind of grit and sorrow he knew all too well. "Mr. Doctor," she whispered, her voice so small it was almost stolen by the wind whistling through the door. "Please. They said you were the only one left." Something in her face, a stubborn set to her jaw, reminded him of Mary, a ghost of a memory that twisted the knife in his gut. "I ain't a doctor anymore, child," he said, his voice rough. "Go find someone else." She took a step closer, her tiny hands balling into fists. "There ain't nobody else," she insisted. "Not in all of Tombstone. My brother. He's coughing up blood. And I don't know how to make it stop." Blood. The word hit him like a physical blow. Just like Mary. The final terrible days. The useless medicines. The desperate prayers. The blood on the sheets. "Kid, I can't help you," he choked out, the words tasting like ash. "I couldn't even help my own wife. Please." The single word was a razor. "Danny's only 4. He's all I got left." The raw pain in her voice was an echo of the one screaming in his own head every night. He found himself asking a question he didn't want the answer to. "What's your name?" "Lucy Brennan, sir," she said, her back straight as a rifle barrel. "And I ain't leaving till you say you'll come." Thunder grumbled low on the horizon. Jack looked at this tiny girl who had marched into his self-made hell and demanded he find the exit. For the first time in 94 days, a flicker of something that wasn't grief moved in his chest. Lucy reached into a pocket of her worn dress. She pulled out a small bundle of cloth and set it carefully on the table. She unwrapped it. Inside were 6 silver coins and a tarnished, heart-shaped locket. "This is everything we got," she said, her voice trembling just a little. She pushed the small pile toward him. "Mama died when Danny was born. Papa went to the copper mines last winter. He never came back." Jack stared at the meager offering. It was nothing. Not enough to buy a bottle of proper medicine, let alone a miracle. But the way she offered it, with a dignity that shamed his own despair, it reminded him of the man he used to be, the doctor who believed he could make a difference. He pushed the little bundle back toward her. "Keep your money," he said, his voice quiet. He stood, his legs stiff from sitting. "Where's the boy?" A light bloomed on Lucy's face, bright as the desert sun. "The old boarding house," she said, her voice filled with a hope he didn't deserve. "4th Street, room 7. As they walked, the dust of Tombstone swirled around their feet. Lucy had to half run to keep up with his long strides, and she kept looking up at him, as if she was afraid he might just vanish into thin air. The boarding house smelled of lye soap and regret. He followed her up the creaking stairs. Room 7 was hardly a room at all. Just a cot, a washstand, and a cracked window overlooking a dirty alley. On the cot, a little boy lay shivering under a thin blanket. His breathing was a wet, rattling sound Jack knew all too well. It was the sound of lungs filling with fluid, the sound of drowning on dry land. "Danny," Lucy whispered, kneeling by the bed. "I brought help." Jack moved closer, the old instincts taking over. The boy's face was flushed with fever. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. When he coughed, a weak, wet sound, flecks of bright red blood appeared on his pale lips. Consumption. And by the sound of it, pneumonia had joined the party. A death sentence out here. "How long?" Jack asked, his fingers finding the boy's thready pulse. 2 weeks, Lucy said, her voice steady, but her hands were shaking. It started small. A cough, then the fever. Yesterday, the blood started. Jack examined the boy. He was fading fast. Any decent doctor would tell her to prepare for the worst. But looking at Lucy's fierce, desperate face, he heard Mary's last words whispered in his memory. "Find something worth fighting for, Jack." Maybe this was it. Maybe he'd fail again. But this little girl had looked at a drunken, broken man and seen a doctor. He had to try to be that man for her. "I'll need supplies," he said, his voice finally sounding like his own again. "And it's going to be a long night." Lucy's smile was the first sunrise he'd truly seen in 3 months. But as he opened his dusty medical bag, he saw something on the boy's pillowcase. Not just blood. There was a faint, bluish-black powder mixed in with it. Something that didn't belong. Something that looked less like sickness and more like poison. Danny's little body shook with another racking cough. The boy was burning up, his skin radiating a dry, intense heat. Jack had seen lung fever 100 times, but this felt different. The speed of it, the violence, and that strange, dark powder he'd wiped from the pillow. He pretended to clean the boy's mouth, but he secretly scraped a sample of the substance under his fingernail. "How long has he been this bad?" Jack asked, his mind racing. He laid out his instruments on a rickety table, the familiar glint of steel a small comfort. "It got real bad last night," Lucy said, wringing out a cloth in a basin of murky water. "He couldn't even keep water down this morning." She placed the cool cloth on her brother's forehead with a tenderness that made Jack's chest ache. "I've been singing to him, but I think he's getting scared." Jack placed his stethoscope on the boy's tiny, heaving chest. The sound inside was a storm, fluid, thick, and heavy. But underneath it, he heard something else. A frantic, irregular heartbeat. A rhythm that spoke of more than just fever. It spoke of a toxin. "Danny," Jack said softly. The boy's fever-bright eyes fluttered open. "I'm going to help you. But you have to be brave for me. Can you do that?" Danny nodded weakly. Then his lips moved. The whisper was too faint to hear. "What did he say?" Jack asked, leaning in. Lucy's voice caught. "He wants to know if you're going to leave, like Papa did." The words were a punch to the gut. This child, fighting for every breath, was worried about being abandoned. Again. Jack thought of all the people he'd turned away since Mary's death. The town he had abandoned in his grief. "Listen to me, Danny," Jack said, taking the boy's hot little hand. "I am not going anywhere. Not until you're strong enough to run and play. I promise." A ghost of a smile touched Danny's lips before another coughing fit seized him. Jack worked quickly, preparing a poultice. But instead of the usual herbs for consumption, he mixed in a small amount of charcoal from the stove. A powerful absorbent. It was a long shot. A desperate guess. If he was wrong, it would do nothing. If he was right, it might just save the boy's life. Lucy watched his every move. "Mr. Morrison," she said in a quiet moment, as Danny's breathing seemed to ease just a little. "You remind me of my papa, before he got sick." Jack looked up. "How so?" "Same sad eyes," she said, her gaze direct and unnerving. "But tonight, watching you, you look different." like the sadness is fighting with something else. Jack didn't know what to say. He looked at the sample of powder under his nail. He thought about the missing father who went to the mines and never came back. He thought about 2 children, alone in a dangerous town, with one of them suddenly falling deathly ill. It wasn't adding up. "Lucy," he said slowly. "Your papa. What kind of work did he do at the mines?" "He wasn't a miner," she said, surprising him. "He was a chemist, an assayer. He tested the rock to see how much silver was in it. An assayer, a chemist, a man who worked with minerals and powders and chemicals every single day." And Jack suddenly had a terrible, sinking feeling that Danny's sickness hadn't just appeared out of thin air. It had been delivered. Someone in Tombstone wanted these children gone, and they were willing to kill a 4-year-old boy to make it happen. The rain started just after midnight, a furious downpour that lashed against the windowpane. Inside, the little room was a battlefield. Danny's fever spiked, and he began to thrash in his sleep, muttering words Jack couldn't understand. Jack worked relentlessly, forcing small doses of the charcoal mixture and willow bark tea between the boy's lips, bathing his forehead, listening to the desperate battle in his lungs. Lucy never left his side. She was a tiny, fierce general, following Jack's orders without question, her face a mask of concentration. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice raw with exhaustion. Jack didn't lie. The next few hours will tell the tale. He was fighting 2 enemies now. The pneumonia that was a real and present danger, and the poison he was convinced was in the boy's system. He was working blind, with nothing but a hunch and a prayer. Around 3 in the morning, Danny's eyes snapped open. The fever seemed to break for a moment, and a strange clarity filled his gaze. He looked right at Lucy. "Lucy," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "I saw Mama. She was holding out her hand." "No," Lucy said, her voice fierce. She gripped his hand. "You're not going anywhere, Danny Brennan. You hear me? We have to see the ocean someday. You promised." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He saw Mary's face, pale and tired, making him promise to go on living. He had failed that promise. He wouldn't fail this one. "Danny," Jack said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your mama is watching over you, but she's not ready for you yet. She sent me to tell you that. She wants you to stay here. With Lucy." The boy's eyes shifted to Jack. A flicker of trust. A hint of hope. "I've been thinking about something," Jack continued, the words coming from a place he thought had died with Mary. "This big house I have. It's too quiet. It needs noise. It needs a family." Lucy stared at him, her eyes wide. "There's a yard for a garden," Jack said, the idea taking root and growing as he spoke, "and a big oak tree out back. Perfect for a treehouse. But it's no good for one person. It's a house for a family. If a brave girl and her even braver little brother were looking for one." "You mean you want us?" Lucy breathed, the words barely a whisper. "I think I need you," Jack said, the truth of it hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "More than you need me." Danny managed a weak, wavering smile. "Would you teach me?" he whispered. "To be a doctor? Like you?" "I'd be honored to, son," Jack said. The word son felt strange and wonderful on his tongue. Just then, as if on cue, heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. The sound was wrong. Too loud. Too aggressive. The door to the room burst open, slamming against the wall. Sheriff Clanton stood there, his face grim. Behind him stood a tall, severe-looking woman in a black dress. Her eyes swept the room with disdain. But it wasn't the sheriff or the woman that made Jack's blood run cold. It was the man standing behind them, half hidden in the shadows of the hallway. A man with the cold, dead eyes of a snake. A man Jack recognized from the wanted posters. A bounty hunter named Silas Kane. And he was staring right at the tarnished locket Lucy had placed on the bedside table. "There they are, Sheriff," the woman in black said, her voice like cracking ice. "The Brennan children, just as the anonymous tip described." Jack moved, placing himself between the newcomers and the bed. "What is the meaning of this?" "This here is Mrs. Peeton," Sheriff Clanton grunted, not meeting Jack's eyes. Territorial Children's Welfare. She's got papers. Says these kids are wards of the state. They're to be separated. The girl goes to an orphanage in Phoenix, the boy to Tucson. No! The word ripped out of Lucy. She stood in front of Danny, a tiny defiant shield. We stay together. Mrs. Peeton let out a cruel little laugh. Family? You are orphans. A burden. You cannot care for this sick child. Jack's jaw tightened. The boy is critically ill. Moving him is a death sentence. And who are you? Mrs. Peeton sneered, looking him up and down. I was told a drunken wash-up lived here. I am Dr. Jack Morrison, he said, his voice cold as steel. And I am telling you, as his physician, that this boy is not to be moved. The bounty hunter, Silas Kane, finally stepped out of the shadows. He didn't look at Jack. He didn't look at the sheriff. His eyes were fixed on the locket, a hungry, predatory gleam in his gaze. The doctor is right, Clanton. Let's not be hasty. This was wrong. A bounty hunter agreeing with him? Kane was known for his brutality, not his compassion. He was playing an angle. See, Sheriff? Jack pressed, sensing an opening. Even this gentleman can see the boy is too fragile. But Mrs. Peeton wasn't backing down. The law is the law. We have a court order. She waved a piece of paper. Silas Kane smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. Perhaps we can all come to an arrangement. The boy is sick. He needs medicine. Medicine costs money. His gaze flickered to Lucy. I'm sure the girl wouldn't want her brother to suffer. Maybe she has something of value. Something her father left her. It all clicked into place. The poison. The anonymous tip. The bounty hunter. They weren't here for the children's welfare. They were here for something else. Something the children had. And Silas Kane thought it was inside that locket. There's nothing, Lucy said, her voice shaking as she snatched the locket from the table and clutched it in her fist. Kane took a step forward. Little girl, don't lie to me. That's enough, Jack boomed, stepping in Kane's path. You're not touching her. He looked directly at Sheriff Clanton. Are you going to let this vulture threaten a child in front of you? Clanton shifted uncomfortably. He was out of his depth. He was a small-town sheriff dealing with territorial orders and a killer for hire. Now, Morrison, let's all just calm down. I am calm, Jack said, his voice dangerously low. But in about 10 seconds, I'm going to start treating this man for a broken nose. He's scaring my patients. Mrs. Peeton gasped, indignant. Your patients? You have no legal claim. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Jack said. He walked over to his medical bag, a sudden wild idea forming in his mind. He pulled out a leather folio he hadn't opened since Mary died. It was filled with his credentials, his deeds, his bank statements. Proof of the life he'd thrown away. I am a licensed physician. I own a home free and clear. I have more than sufficient funds to provide for their care. He slapped the documents down on the washstand. I am formally declaring my intent to adopt both Lucy and Danny Brennan. You can serve me with your papers, Mrs. Peeton, and I will see you in territorial court, and I will win. The room was silent. Even Silas Kane looked surprised. Lucy stared at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Mr. Morrison, you don't... Yes, Jack said, kneeling down in front of her and Danny. He took their hands. His voice was thick with emotion. I do. You two walked into my life and reminded me how to be a doctor. How to be a man. You didn't just ask me to save Danny. You saved me. He looked at both of them, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. You're mine now, if you'll have me. Yes, Lucy sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. Yes. Danny, from his bed, whispered, Papa Jack? Before anyone could react to the beautiful, fragile moment, Silas Kane moved with the speed of a striking snake. He wasn't going for the children. He was going for the folio of papers Jack had left on the stand. He snatched them up. This is all very touching, Kane sneered, backing toward the door. but I think I'll be holding on to these for safekeeping. Sheriff, I believe your business here is done, for now." And then he was gone, melting back into the stormy night, taking with him the only proof Jack had to his name. Jack was left with 2 children, a verbal promise, and a deadly enemy who now knew exactly how much he had to lose. The storm outside finally broke, leaving behind a world washed clean and eerily quiet. But inside room 7, a new storm was brewing. Without his papers, Jack's claim was just words. He was a disgraced doctor with a drinking problem. Mrs. Peaton and Kane held all the cards. "He took them," Lucy whispered, her face pale. "He took all your papers." "It's all right," Jack said, though his heart was hammering. "They're just papers. We'll figure this out." But how? Kane wasn't just a bounty hunter. He was known to work for the Territorial Mining Syndicate, a ruthless organization that crushed anyone who got in their way. Why were they interested in 2 orphans and a tarnished locket? Sheriff Clanton cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Look, Morrison, my hands are tied. The order is official. I'm supposed to take the children now." "You can't," Jack said, his mind racing. "The boy is still too weak, and you saw Kane. He's not after their welfare. He's after something they have." "What could they possibly have?" Clanton scoffed. "They're penniless." "The locket," Jack said, his eyes finding Lucy's hand, still clenched tightly around the metal heart. "It has to be the locket." He turned to Lucy. "Lucy, what's inside it? Did your father ever tell you?" Lucy shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "It won't open. Papa said it was broken. He said it was Mama's, and it was just to remember her by." "Let me see," Jack said gently. She reluctantly placed the locket in his hand. It was old, the silver worn smooth. He examined the clasp. It wasn't broken. It was a trick latch, a puzzle box disguised as jewelry. His hands, the surgeon's hands, traced the intricate engravings. He felt a tiny, almost invisible seam, a twist, a push, and it clicked open. But inside, there was no miniature portrait of their mother. There was no lock of hair. There was just a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. And a small, oddly shaped brass key. Jack carefully unfolded the paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a series of numbers and letters, written in a precise, neat hand. It looked like a formula, or a map coordinate. Underneath the code was a single, cryptic phrase: "Where the sleeping giant guards, the silver heart." Sheriff Clanton squinted at the paper. "What in blazes is that?" Before Jack could answer, Danny stirred on the bed. His fever had come down, the charcoal and Jack's care finally winning the battle against the poison. His voice was weak, but clear. "The giant," he whispered. "Papa's story." Lucy gasped. "I remember. The bedtime story he used to tell us. About the old, abandoned mine, the sleeping giant, up in the Dragoon Mountains. He said it was a special place. A map, a key, a secret location tied to a mine. And their father was an assayer." It all crashed into place with sickening clarity. Lucy and Danny's father hadn't just disappeared. He'd found something. Something big. A rich vein of silver, maybe. Something valuable enough for the mining syndicate to send a man like Silas Kane. Something valuable enough to kill for. "Clanton," Jack said urgently, his voice low. "Their father, John Brennan. He must have double-crossed the syndicate. He found a strike, recorded its location on this paper, and hid it. Kane thinks the children know where it is. He poisoned the boy to create a crisis, to get them out in the open, to flush out whatever Brennan left behind." The sheriff's face went slack with shock. He was a peacekeeper, not a conspirator. I had no idea. Mrs. Peaton, she seemed so official." "She's a pawn," Jack snapped. "Or worse. Right now it doesn't matter. Kane has my papers. He'll use them as leverage. He'll be back. And when he comes, he won't be asking nicely." A cold dread washed over Jack. He had just promised these children a family, a future. And in doing so, he had painted a giant target on all 3 of their backs. They weren't just fighting a legal battle for custody anymore. They were in a fight for their lives, and their only weapon was a child's bedtime story. "We have to run," Lucy said, her voice a small, terrified whisper. "We can disappear. Head for California." Jack looked at Danny, still pale and weak on the cot. "We can't. Not with Danny this fragile. And Kane would hunt us to the ends of the earth. Running is what he wants." He paced the small room, his mind working furiously. "No, we don't run. We fight." Sheriff Clanton looked at the three of them, a broken doctor and two frightened children. Fight? Fight Silas Kane and the syndicate? Morrison, that's suicide. "No," Jack said, a spark of the old fire returning to his eyes. "It's a diagnosis. The disease is Kane. The cure is the truth." He held up the tiny key in the coated paper. "This is our only medicine. We have to find out what this means. We have to find what John Brennan hid before Kane does." He looked at the sheriff. "I need your help, Clanton. I can't do this alone. You have to delay Mrs. Peeton. Buy me time. Just 24 hours. Clanton hesitated, his loyalty to his badge warring with the horror of what he'd just learned. He looked at Danny's trusting face, at Lucy's desperate plea. He finally let out a long, slow breath. "All right, Morrison. I'll tell her the boy had a relapse, that he's too sick to travel. It'll buy you a day. Maybe two. But after that, you're on your own." The sheriff left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon. They were safe, for now. But the clock was ticking. Jack knelt by the bed. "Danny, I need you to think hard. The story. The sleeping giant. Did your papa ever say anything else about it? Anything at all?" Danny scrunched up his face in concentration. He said the giant's heart wasn't made of rock. It was made of wood. And it had a voice. A wooden heart with a voice. It made no sense." "A voice?" Lucy prompted gently. Like music," Danny whispered, his eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. "He said only a Brennan could make it sing. A wooden heart that sings." Jack's mind reeled. It was a riddle wrapped in a children's story, but their lives depended on solving it. He looked at the small brass key in his palm. It wasn't a key for a door. The head was too wide, the shaft too short. It looked more like a winding key, for a clock, or a music box, with a wooden heart that sings. Jack looked at Lucy, a wild hope dawning in his eyes. "The boarding house, the landlady, Martha, does she have a piano, an organ, anything that plays music?" Lucy's eyes lit up with understanding. "In the parlor, an old pump organ. Papa used to play it for us sometimes." They had it, the next piece of the puzzle. John Brennan hadn't just hidden a map. He'd hidden the map's instructions inside a music box, and hidden the music box itself somewhere in the sleeping giant mine. And the cryptic phrase, "where the sleeping giant guards the silver heart," it wasn't a location. It was the name of the song the music box played. But as this wave of relief washed over him, a new, colder one followed. Silas Kane was not a stupid man. He knew the children were the key. He wouldn't just wait for the sheriff's delay to run out. He would be watching every move they made, and going to that organ in the public parlor was walking right into his trap. They couldn't go down to the parlor. Kane would be watching the boarding house. They were trapped in this tiny room, with the solution just one floor below them. "He'll be out there," Lucy whispered, peeking through a crack in the window curtain. "Waiting." "I know," Jack said. His mind was a whirlwind. He needed to get to that organ, but he couldn't risk leading Kane right to it. He needed a distraction. A big one. He looked around the small room. His eyes landed on his medical bag. It was filled with vials and powders, herbs and chemicals. He was a healer. But Mary's death had taught him that the same knowledge that could heal could also be twisted. He knew how to create remedies. He also knew how to create chaos. "Lucy," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need you to be my nurse. I'm going to mix a few things together. It's going to create a lot of thick, foul-smelling smoke. It's harmless, but it's going to look like the room is on fire. When the smoke starts pouring out, I need you to scream. Scream like you've never screamed before. Can you do that?" Lucy nodded, her eyes wide but determined. "Danny," Jack said, turning to the boy. "You're going to be my patient. I need you to cough as loud as you can. Make it sound like you're choking." He went to work, his hands moving with practiced speed. He mixed sulfur with potassium nitrate, adding a dash of powdered zinc. It was a simple alchemical trick, a theatrical device. He placed the concoction in a metal basin. "Ready?" he asked. They both nodded. He lit a match. The powder mixture caught with a whoosh, erupting in a dense cloud of yellow-gray smoke that stank of rotten eggs. It billowed instantly, filling the tiny room. "Now!" he yelled. Lucy let out a piercing shriek that could curdle milk. Danny began a series of deep, racking coughs that sounded terrifyingly real. Smoke poured from under the door, and out the cracked window into the alley. Jack threw open the door. "Help!" he roared. "Fire! My patient can't breathe!" Doors opened down the hall. The landlady, Martha, came running up the stairs, her face a mask of panic. "What's happened?" "The stovepipe must have backed up," Jack improvised, waving his arms through the fake smoke. "The boy is choking! We need to get him out of here!" It was the perfect chaos. Residents spilled into the hallway. Martha shrieked and ran for the water pump. In the confusion, everyone was looking up the stairs, at the smoke, at the screaming child. No one was looking at the parlor. "Stay with Danny," Jack murmured to Lucy. "Keep the act up for as long as you can." He slipped down the stairs, his heart pounding. The parlor was empty. The pump organ stood against the far wall, a hulking piece of dark wood. He raced to it. There were carvings all over its surface, intricate leaves and vines. He ran his hands over the wood, searching. Where would you hide something on an organ? His fingers found it. A small, decorative wooden rose on the side panel. It felt different from the others. He pressed it. It gave way with a soft click, and a section of the paneling popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside sat a small, beautifully carved wooden box. A music box. He took the small brass key from his pocket. It fit perfectly. He wound it. A delicate, haunting melody tinkled through the empty parlor. It was a simple tune, one he'd never heard before. He had to memorize it. He closed his eyes, concentrating, letting the notes burn themselves into his memory. The song played through once, then stopped. He had the tune. He had the location, the sleeping giant mine. He had the name of the song. He had everything he needed. He carefully closed the compartment, slipped the music box into his coat, and turned to leave, and found himself face to face with Silas Kane. The bounty hunter stood in the doorway, a cruel smile on his face. He held a pistol, aimed directly at Jack's chest. "Very clever, Doctor. The fire, the screaming children. A wonderful performance. But you're not the only one who knows how to listen." His eyes flickered to the bulge in Jack's coat. "Give it to me." Kane's pistol was steady. There was no way out. The whole plan, the clever distraction, had failed. He'd led the wolf right to the sheep. "The box, Doctor," Kane repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Now." Jack's mind raced. He could give him the box, but Kane wouldn't just take it and leave. He would kill them all to protect the secret. The only chance they had was for Kane to believe he had what he wanted, without actually having it. "All right," Jack said, slowly reaching into his coat. "Don't shoot. You can have it." But instead of the music box, his fingers closed around a heavy glass bottle of laudanum from his medical kit. In one swift movement, he hurled it at the large oil lamp hanging beside the doorway. The glass shattered. Laudanum and lamp oil exploded, and the doorway erupted in a sheet of flame. Kane roared in surprise and pain, jumping back as the fire licked at his clothes. The sudden inferno created a wall of fire between them. It was a desperate, insane move. The whole boarding house could go up in flames. "Lucy! Danny! Get out!" Jack screamed up the stairs. "Out the back!" He didn't wait to see if they'd heard. He turned and sprinted for the back of the house, coughing as the real smoke, thick and black from the burning oil, filled his lungs. He burst through the kitchen door into the alley, just as Lucy was helping Danny climb out of their first-floor window. "This way!" he yelled, Grabbing Danny and hoisting him onto his shoulders, they ran. Behind them, screams and shouts filled the air as the fire began to consume the old dry wood of the boarding house. They didn't look back. They plunged into the maze of Tombstone's back alleys, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the fire, and the monster they had left inside it. They found refuge in the back room of the general store, the owner a grateful former patient of Jack's. He gave them water and blankets, his face a mixture of fear and concern. The whole town's in an uproar. Clanton's formed a bucket brigade, but the boarding house is a total loss. And Kane? Jack asked, his voice hoarse. Nobody's seen him, the store owner said. He either got out, or he's ashes. Jack knew better. A man like Silas Kane didn't die in a simple fire. He was out there, wounded maybe, furious, definitely. And now the hunt was personal. He pulled the music box from his coat. It was a little singed, but intact. He had the melody in his head. He had the name of the mine. But getting there was another problem. The Dragoon Mountains were a 2-day ride, through treacherous, open country. Kane would be hunting them, and they were on foot, with a sick child. "Papa Jack," Danny said, his voice small. "I'm sorry. I caused all this trouble." "No," Jack said fiercely, pulling the boy into a hug. "None of this is your fault. This is about greed, and we're going to end it." He looked at Lucy. "But we can't do it alone. We need help." There was only one person in town who might stand with them now. One person who had seen the truth and had the authority to act on it. Sheriff Clanton. But when Jack found him near the smoldering ruins of the boarding house, the lawman's face was pale and grim. "Morrison, you've got bigger problems than Kane." "What are you talking about?" Clanton pointed down the main street. A dust cloud was rising in the distance, a big one. "That's a federal marshal's wagon, and Mrs. Peaton is riding with them. I got a telegraph an hour ago. She went over my head. She's accused you of kidnapping, arson, and endangering the lives of minors. They're coming to arrest you and take the children by force." The trap was closing. Kane was hunting them from the shadows. The law was hunting them in broad daylight. They were caught between a killer and a cage. Jack looked at the approaching wagon, then back at the mountains looming on the horizon. He had no papers, no credibility, and no time. All he had was a cryptic song and 2 children who trusted him with their lives. He made a decision. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was their only chance. "Clanton," he said, his eyes blazing with a desperate intensity. "I'm not a kidnapper, and I'm not an arsonist. I'm a doctor, and I'm a father. And I'm going to prove it. You have to stop that wagon. Lie. Beg. Stand in their way. I don't care what you do. Just buy me a few more hours." "And what are you going to do?" the sheriff asked, bewildered. "I'm going to the Sleeping Giant," Jack said. "I'm going to find what John Brennan died for, and I'm going to use it to burn the syndicate to the ground." The federal marshal was a man named Elias Thorne, and he had a jaw like a block of granite and eyes that missed nothing. He listened patiently to Sheriff Clanton's stammering story about a tragic fire and a misunderstanding, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Peaton sat beside him in the wagon, looking smug and triumphant. "So, let me get this straight, Sheriff," Thorne said when Clanton was finished. "Dr. Morrison, a man with a known history of instability, sets fire to a building with 2 children inside, and then flees with them into the desert, and you want me to believe he's the victim here?" "I'm just saying it's not as simple as it looks," Clanton insisted, sweating under the marshal's cold gaze. Meanwhile, Jack, Lucy, and Danny were slipping out the back of Tombstone, using the dry creek bed as cover. Jack had bartered his gold watch, the last thing he had of Mary's, for 2 sturdy mules and supplies from the sympathetic store owner. The loss of the watch was a sharp pain, but he knew Mary would have understood. This was for his new family. As they rode toward the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains, Jack replayed the melody from the music box over and over in his head, terrified he would forget a single note. "How will we find the right mine?" Lucy asked, her voice small against the vast emptiness of the desert. "There are hundreds of them up there." "Your father said it was called the Sleeping Giant," Jack said. "It must look like one. We look for a mountain that looks like a man lying down." For hours they rode in silence, the sun beating down on them. Danny, still weak, had fallen asleep, his small body slumped against Jack's back. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Lucy pointed. There, look. Against the skyline, one of the mountains formed a perfect silhouette of a man at rest. A head, a chest, sloping legs. The sleeping giant. They found the mine entrance half hidden by a rock slide and overgrown brush. A faded wooden sign lay splintered on the ground. S.G. Mining Co. It read. Below it, almost illegible, were the words Corazon de Plata. The Silver Heart. The name of the song. This was the place. Using a lantern from their supplies, they ventured into the darkness. The air was cold and damp, the tunnel supported by thick, ancient-looking timbers. Papa said the giant's heart was made of wood, Danny whispered, his voice echoing in the stillness. And it had a voice. They walked deeper, their lantern casting dancing shadows on the rock walls. The main tunnel branched into smaller ones. It was a maze. They were about to turn back when Jack saw it. Scratched into the wall was a small, simple drawing of a heart. An arrow pointed down a narrow, dark passage he hadn't noticed before. They followed it. The passage ended abruptly in a small, circular cavern, and in the center of the cavern stood the most peculiar thing Jack had ever seen. It was an enormous, intricate web of wooden beams, gears, and what looked like giant, hollow wooden pipes, all connected to a series of bellows. It looked like a bizarre, oversized pipe organ, built right into the rock. And at its center was a control panel made of polished wood, shaped like a giant heart. The wooden heart, with a voice. But there was something else in the room. In the far corner, almost hidden in the shadows, was a skeleton. The tattered remains of a miner's clothes clung to the bones, and clutched in its skeletal hand was a geologist's hammer. Jack moved closer. Beside the body was a leather satchel. He opened it. Inside was a journal. The last entry was dated nearly a year ago. They know. Kane was here. He tried to force the secret from me. I refused. He sealed the entrance, leaving me to die. But I've won. The Silver Heart is safe. Only my children, with the song I taught them, can reveal her true voice. This machine is my legacy. It is not a path to wealth, but a key to justice. The silver is tainted. The ore samples prove it. The syndicate is poisoning the territory's water supply. This is the evidence. My life for the truth. Tell Lucy and Danny I love them. The words hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. John Brennan. This was him. He hadn't abandoned his children. He had died protecting them. And he hadn't discovered a silver strike. He had discovered a crime. The syndicate wasn't just greedy. They were knowingly poisoning the land, the livestock, the people, all for profit. This machine, this wooden organ, wasn't a map, it was a lock. And the song was the combination. On the wooden heart console, there was a series of levers and pedals. Jack realized they corresponded to musical notes. He sat down. He took a deep breath. He remembered the simple, haunting melody from the music box. He began to play. His fingers moved over the levers, his feet working the pedals. The first few notes were clumsy, but then the melody took hold. The bellows began to pump. Air hissed through the giant wooden pipes. A deep, resonant chord echoed through the cavern, a sound so low it vibrated in their bones. As he played the final note of the song, there was a tremendous grinding sound. A section of the rock wall behind the organ slid away, revealing a hidden chamber. The chamber was a small, dry office. On a desk sat a neat stack of assay reports, with detailed chemical breakdowns. Beside it was a box filled with ore samples, each one tagged and dated. This was Brennan's proof, the evidence that would destroy the syndicate. But as Lucy and Danny ran toward the desk, their father's legacy, a shadow fell across the entrance of the cavern. "Bravo, Doctor," Silas Kane said, stepping into the light of the lantern. His face was blistered and raw from the fire, his clothes singed. One arm was bound in a makeshift sling, but in his good hand he held his pistol, and it was aimed right at Danny. A beautiful recital. Now, step away from the box. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood two grim-faced men, both armed with rifles. He must have followed them, waiting for them to do the hard work. It's over, Kane, Jack said, slowly rising, positioning himself between the gunman and the children. I know everything. The poisoned water, the cover-up. Brennan's evidence will put you all away for life. Kane laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Evidence? There will be no evidence. There will be a tragic mind collapse. A foolish doctor and 2 orphan children lost forever. I, on the other hand, will find this silver strike, and my employers will be very grateful. He gestured with his pistol. The box, now. Jack knew this was the end of the line. There was no escape. But he looked at the machine. Brennan had called it a key to justice. A machine with a voice. He thought of the deep, powerful sound it had made. A sound that vibrated through the very rock of the mountain. He had one last, desperate, suicidal idea. Lucy, he said, his voice calm and steady, never taking his eyes off Kane. The song. The one Papa taught you. Can you sing it for me? I want to hear it one more time. Kane sneered. How sweet. A final request. Go on, girl. Sing. Lucy, confused and terrified, looked at Jack. He gave her the slightest nod. She took a shaky breath and began to sing the simple melody, her clear voice echoing in the cavern. As she sang, Jack slowly sat back down at the strange organ. He placed his hands on the levers. What are you doing? Kane snarled, taking a step forward. I'm playing an encore, Jack said. And he slammed his hands and feet down on the controls, playing not the simple melody, but a chaotic, thundering blast of the lowest, most powerful notes the machine could produce. The cavern groaned. The entire mountain seemed to shudder around them. The sound was deafening, a physical force that vibrated up through the floor, through their teeth. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The old timbers supporting the mine tunnel began to creak and splinter. Stop it! Kane screamed, but his voice was lost in the apocalyptic noise. The rock wall above the tunnel entrance cracked. Then, with a deafening roar, it gave way. Tons of rock and earth cascaded down, completely sealing the passage they had come through. Kane and his men were trapped on the other side. Their shouts were abruptly cut off by the final, thunderous collapse. The cavern was plunged into darkness and a sudden ringing silence. They were alive. But they were buried alive. Trapped deep inside the sleeping giant, with no way out and a limited supply of air. The key to justice had become their tomb. The silence in the cavern was absolute, broken only by the frantic sound of their own breathing. The air was thick with dust. Jack fumbled for the lantern, his hands shaking. He managed to relight it. The single flame pushed back the oppressive darkness, revealing the wall of rock and debris that had been the tunnel entrance. There was no way through. We're trapped, Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. Danny started to cry, a quiet, hiccuping sound. No, Jack said, his voice more confident than he felt. Not trapped. Safe. He pulled them close. Kane is gone. We're safe from him. He looked at the wall of rock. He had saved them from the wolves, only to lock them in a cage. Mary's last words echoed again. Find something worth fighting for. He was fighting. He just needed a way to win. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic rising in his chest. John Brennan was a brilliant man. A chemist. An engineer. He built this thing. He wouldn't have built a trap with only one way in. He took the lantern and began to examine the cavern again, this time not as a doctor, but as a survivor. He looked at the strange organ. He looked at the hidden office. He ran his hands along the rock walls, searching for another seam, another hidden door. Nothing. Papa Jack, Danny said, his voice muffled against Jack's coat. The story. Papa said, when the giant sings his deepest song, he wakes up. Jack froze. He looked back at the machine. He had played a random chaotic chord, a blast of noise, not a song. Brennan's journal said only my children, with the song I taught them, can reveal her true voice. He had opened the lock with the song. What if there was another song, a different purpose? He went back to the hidden office. Brennan's journal lay open on the desk. He scanned the last page again. This machine is my legacy. A key to justice. He turned the page. On the back, almost invisible in the faint light, was another set of notations. Not a chemical formula. It was musical notation. A different melody. Shorter, simpler, and marked with technical instructions. Bellows at full pressure. Hold final chord. There's another song, he breathed. He sat at the console. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. Their last hope. He looked at the notes, took a deep breath, and began to play. It was a completely different tune. Not haunting and delicate, but powerful. A rising scale that seemed to build on itself. As he played, the bellows worked furiously, and he could feel the pressure building in the giant wooden pipes. He reached the final chord and, following the instructions, held it. The machine let out a single, deafening note, a blast of sound and air so powerful it felt like an explosion. But this time, the cavern didn't shake. Instead, the floor of the hidden office began to vibrate. With a low groan of protesting metal, a square section of the rock floor began to descend, revealing a dark, narrow shaft. It was a service lift. A secret way out. Using rope from the lift, Jack lowered the children, the box of evidence, and then himself down into the darkness. The shaft was deep, ending in another tunnel. This one was man-made, lined with smooth, cut stone. It sloped gently upwards, after what felt like an eternity of walking. They saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. They emerged from a small cave opening halfway down the mountain, hidden behind a waterfall. They were free. They rode back to Tombstone under the cover of darkness, arriving just before dawn. The town was quiet. Jack took the children not to the store, but to the one place no one would think to look for them. The small empty house on the hill that had been his and Mary's. His house. Their house. He left them there, sleeping from exhaustion, and walked down to the sheriff's office. He put the box of Brennan's research on the desk. Clanton and Marshall Thorne, who had been drinking coffee and waiting for news, stared at the ore samples and the meticulous, damning reports. "It's all there," Jack said, his voice ragged. "The syndicate has been using a new chemical process to leach silver from low-grade ore. It's efficient, but the runoff, it's loaded with arsenic and lead. They've been dumping it into the San Pedro River, the same river that waters the whole valley." Thorne picked up one of the reports, his face grim. "I've heard whispers. Cattle dying downstream. Unexplained sicknesses in the lower valley." He looked at Jack, his eyes filled with a new respect. "You risked your life for this." "A man died for it," Jack corrected him. "I just delivered his message." The arrival of a federal judge, Harrison Blackwell, was swift. He came not with threats, but with a dozen armed marshals. The syndicate's local office was raided. The mine managers were arrested. The conspiracy unraveled with stunning speed, the corruption reaching all the way to the territorial capital. Tombstone was saved from a slow, invisible death, all thanks to a brave assayer and the doctor who believed his children. A week later, they all stood in Judge Blackwell's makeshift courtroom. The room was packed with townsfolk. Mrs. Peaton was there, looking small and defeated. Her connection to the syndicate, as a paid informant tasked with removing inconvenient families from their land, had been exposed. "In light of the extraordinary circumstances," Judge Blackwell announced, his voice booming through the room, "and the testimony of Marshall Thorne and Sheriff Clanton, all charges against Dr. Jack Morrison are dismissed with prejudice." A cheer went up from the crowd. "Furthermore," the judge continued, looking down at Lucy and Danny, who stood beside Jack, "the court has reviewed the last will and testament of John Brennan, found in his journal. In it, he expresses his wish that, should anything happen to him, his children be placed in the care of a man of science and good character." He smiled. "I can think of no one who fits that description better. I hereby grant full and permanent custody of Lucy and Danny Brennan to Dr. Jack Morrison." The cheer that time was deafening. Jack knelt and pulled both children into his arms. Lucy was crying, but this time, they were tears of pure joy. Danny was beaming. "We're a family," he whispered into Jack's ear. "A real family. Forever and always," Jack whispered back. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch of their house on the hill, watching the sunset paint the desert sky. Jack held Mary's locket in his hand, Lucy had insisted he keep it. He opened it. He removed Brennan's map and key. He found a tiny portrait of Mary from his wallet and carefully fitted it inside. He snapped it shut and handed it to Lucy. "A family needs a memory of its mother," he said softly. Lucy took it, her eyes shining. "What happens now, Papa Jack?" Danny asked, leaning his head against Jack's shoulder. Jack smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Now," he said, pulling them both closer, "we start building that treehouse. And tomorrow, we plant a garden. And the day after that, we see about getting you two an education. Your father would have wanted that." He looked out at the town of Tombstone, his town. He wasn't the broken man who had sat in the saloon, drowning in ghosts. He was a father, a protector, a healer. He had found something worth fighting for. No, they had found him. If you enjoyed this story of how three broken souls found each other in the dust of the Old West and built a family, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more tales of survival and unexpected hope. And let me know in the comments below, what do you think is the true meaning of family? Until next time.